Myth or fact? Does salt increase blood pressure in everyone? Salt. It's on every kitchen table, inside every restaurant shaker, hidden in nearly every snack we love, and sprinkled across our meals without a second thought. For something so small and ordinary, salt has managed to capture both love and fear. For centuries, it was considered essential for survival, even treasured like gold. Entire empires fought to control it. People risked their lives to secure it. Roman soldiers were paid partly in salt, giving us the very word salary. Without it, food spoiled, armies starved, and civilizations faltered. Salt was life. But fast forward to today, and the story has shifted dramatically. Now, salt is often described as the silent enemy lurking in our diets, blamed for raising blood pressure and fueling heart disease. Doctors caution us about it. Health organizations urge us to reduce it. Families warn each other at the dinner table, don't add too much salt, it'll raise your blood pressure. It's advice so common, so repeated, that it feels undeniable. But is it really true for everyone? Does salt truly raise blood pressure in each and every person? Or has this warning become another health myth that's been repeated so often it feels like fact? To unravel this, we need to look deeper. Not just at what salt is, but at how our bodies work, how our diets have changed, and what science has really discovered over the years. Because while salt absolutely plays a role in blood pressure, the truth is far more complicated than a simple slogan. Blood pressure itself is one of the most vital measurements of health. Imagine your arteries as a vast network of flexible tubes running through your body. With every beat, your heart pushes blood forward, creating a force that presses against those artery walls. That force is blood pressure. If it stays in a healthy range, the system works beautifully. But if it rises too high and stays there for years, the damage accumulates quietly. The constant strain stiffens arteries, weakens vessel walls, and forces the heart to work harder than it should. Over time, this leads to heart disease, strokes, kidney problems, and even memory decline. That's why high blood pressure is called the silent killer, because you usually don't feel it until the consequences arrive. Now, sodium, the main mineral in salt, has long been accused of being the trigger that drives this silent killer. The theory sounds simple enough. When you consume too much sodium, your body holds on to extra water. More water in the bloodstream means more volume pushing against artery walls, and that raises blood pressure. On paper, the math looks straightforward. But here's where things get interesting. The human body is not as predictable as a math equation. Not everyone responds to salt in the same way. For decades, researchers have studied this phenomenon, and they've discovered that people fall into two broad categories. Some are salt-sensitive, meaning their blood pressure genuinely rises when they eat more salt. Others are salt-resistant, meaning their blood pressure stays stable even with higher sodium intake. Studies suggest that among people with high blood pressure, about half are salt-sensitive. But among people with normal blood pressure, only about 1 in 4 respond strongly to salt. That means a large portion of the population can eat salty meals without their blood pressure changing much at all. Yet the public health message we all hear makes it sound as if everyone is equally at risk. How did we get here? Part of the answer lies in history. In the mid-20th century, as heart disease rates began to climb in industrialized countries, scientists searched for dietary culprits. Salt consumption stood out, especially in populations where high-sodium diets correlated with higher rates of hypertension. Public health officials, determined to save lives, launched campaigns urging everyone to reduce their salt intake. The message was simplified to make it easy to spread. Less salt equals lower blood pressure, which equals better health. The nuance, that salt's effects depend on genetics, age, and lifestyle, was lost. And once a message this simple is repeated in schools, hospitals, newspapers, and family dinners, it becomes nearly impossible to challenge. But let's pause and think about this carefully. When someone cuts salt from their diet, what do they usually cut along with it? Processed foods? Packaged snacks? fast food meals, canned soups, and frozen dinners. All of these are loaded not only with sodium, but also with unhealthy fats, added sugars, preservatives, and excessive calories. So when blood pressure improves after cutting them out, is salt really the only culprit? Or is the improvement due to the overall reduction in unhealthy food? This is where the salt story becomes tricky. Salt reduction gets all the credit, when in reality, a healthier lifestyle is doing much of the heavy lifting. That doesn't mean salt is off the hook entirely. For salt-sensitive individuals, the link is real and dangerous. In them, a high-sodium diet truly does elevate blood pressure and increase the risk of long-term harm. Age plays a role too. As we grow older, our arteries stiffen, and our kidneys lose efficiency in handling sodium, making us more vulnerable. Genetics also matter. Studies have found that people of African or Asian descent tend to be more salt-sensitive than those of European descent. So while not everyone reacts to salt the same way, large segments of the population are indeed affected more strongly. Another layer to this myth versus fact debate is how salt enters our diets. When most people think of cutting salt, they picture putting away the shaker on the dinner table. But here's the reality. More than 70% of the sodium we consume comes from processed and restaurant foods, not the salt we add ourselves. Bread, sauces, processed meats, breakfast cereals, condiments, all of these contain hidden sodium. So while families argue over whether someone sprinkles too much at dinner, the real problem may already be baked into the meal before it even hits the table. This explains why countries with high reliance on processed foods tend to have higher average sodium intakes. In the United States, for example, average daily sodium consumption is more than 3,400 milligrams, well above the recommended 300 milligrams, which is roughly 1 teaspoon of salt. The World Health Organization suggests lowering that further to about 2,000 milligrams. Yet despite decades of warnings, most people exceed these levels without realizing it. And yet, even with such high intakes, not everyone develops high blood pressure. This is the contradiction that has fueled endless debates. Some scientists argue that universal salt reduction campaigns are necessary because they help those at risk. Others believe the message unfairly punishes those who are salt-resistant, who could enjoy salt more freely without danger. The truth, as usual, lies in the middle. It's also worth considering how fear around salt has shaped marketing. Just like detox juices sell the dream of cleansing toxins, low-sodium labels sell the dream of protection against hypertension. Grocery store shelves are filled with products boasting reduced salt, but what's often overlooked is what replaces it. Sometimes manufacturers substitute other additives or flavor enhancers, which don't necessarily make the product healthier. Consumers buy the promise of safety, even though the full picture is more complicated. And then there's human psychology. We love simple villains and simple solutions. It's easier to tell people avoid salt than to explain the complex interplay of sodium, genetics, kidney function, lifestyle, and processed food consumption. The myth survives because it's clean, direct, and easy to repeat. Salt becomes the scapegoat, even when the truth is far more nuanced. The irony is that salt itself is not new to the human diet. Our ancestors consumed it naturally through whole foods, and when it was scarce, they craved it because their bodies needed it. Modern humans have the opposite problem, not scarcity, but abundance. And abundance, combined with processed food culture, creates conditions our ancestors never faced. It's not salt alone that created a health crisis, but the way modern diets overload us with it invisibly, layered into almost every packaged bite. So does salt increase blood pressure in everyone? The answer so far is clear. No, it doesn't. It can raise blood pressure in many people, especially those who are salt-sensitive, older, or genetically predisposed. But in others, the effect is minimal, if it exists at all. The myth of universality, that salt is dangerous for absolutely everyone, doesn't hold up under scrutiny. But this is only part of the story. To fully understand how salt impacts us, we have to dig deeper into the science of sensitivity, the role of genetics, and the way our modern lifestyles magnify or reduce the risks. One of the strongest factors influencing how salt affects us is genetics. Researchers have discovered that variations in certain genes control how kidneys process sodium. In salt-sensitive people, the kidneys are less efficient at excreting excess sodium, so the body retains more water. This leads to greater blood volume and higher blood pressure. In salt-resistant people, the kidneys are more effective at flushing sodium out, preventing the same rise in pressure. This genetic lottery partly explains why salt reduction campaigns work wonders in some populations, but show little effect in others. For example, studies have shown that African American communities in the United States often have higher rates of salt sensitivity, which contributes to elevated risks of hypertension. Similarly, some Asian populations, with traditionally high sodium diets from soy sauce and pickled foods, show stronger links between salt and blood pressure. By contrast, certain European populations can consume relatively high levels of salt with less obvious impact. But genetics don't tell the whole story. Culture and diet matter just as much. In Japan, for instance, traditional diets rich in salty pickles, miso soup, and soy sauce were once linked to some of the world's highest rates of stroke. As public health measures encouraged people to cut back, those rates declined. In contrast, Mediterranean diets, which also contain salt through bread, cheese, and cured meats, are balanced by high levels of fruits, vegetables, and healthy fats. The overall dietary pattern seems to buffer some of the risks. This shows that salt doesn't exist in isolation. It interacts with everything else we eat. A high-salt diet heavy in processed foods is far more dangerous than a high-salt diet balanced with potassium-rich fruits and vegetables. Potassium, found in foods like bananas, spinach, and beans, helps counteract sodium's effects by relaxing blood vessels and aiding kidney function. This balance is crucial, yet often ignored in simplistic warnings about salt. Another key piece of the puzzle is how much salt we actually need. The body requires sodium to function, but only in small amounts. Most health organizations recommend about 2,000 to 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day, roughly a teaspoon of salt. But average intake in many countries is nearly double that. The World Health Organization estimates that reducing sodium intake globally could prevent millions of deaths from cardiovascular disease each year. That's why governments and health authorities have invested so much energy in pushing salt reduction policies. Yet the debate continues. Some researchers argue that cutting sodium too aggressively could backfire. Studies have suggested that extremely low sodium intake may increase levels of certain hormones like renin and aldosterone, which regulate blood pressure, and that this hormonal shift could carry risks of its own. In other words, too much salt is harmful, but too little might not be ideal either. The safe zone lies somewhere in between, and finding it depends on who you are and what your body needs. The story becomes even more complicated when we add the food industry into the equation. Salt is not only a flavor enhancer, it's also a preservative that extends shelf life and improves texture. That's why it's so heavily used in processed foods. When public health campaigns call for reduced sodium, the industry often responds by marketing low-sodium versions of products. But these substitutes sometimes come with trade-offs. To make up for reduced flavor, manufacturers may add sugar, fat, or artificial flavorings. This can create foods that look healthier on the label, but don't necessarily support better overall health. It's a reminder that salt reduction isn't just about numbers, it's about the bigger picture of diet quality. So what does science actually say about how to manage salt? Large-scale studies provide some clues. One of the most famous is the DASH diet, dietary approaches to stop hypertension. This eating pattern emphasizes fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lean proteins, and low-fat dairy while reducing sodium intake. Research shows that the DASH diet can lower blood pressure significantly, especially in salt-sensitive individuals. But here's the interesting part. Even participants who weren't particularly salt-sensitive saw improvements. Why? Because the diet as a whole provided more potassium, magnesium, and calcium, all minerals that help regulate blood pressure. This reinforces the idea that it's not salt alone that matters, but how salt fits into the broader dietary context. Beyond diet, lifestyle factors play a huge role in blood pressure. Stress, physical activity, body weight, and sleep all interact with sodium's effects. Someone under chronic stress, eating poorly, and sleeping badly is far more likely to suffer from hypertension than someone living a balanced lifestyle, regardless of salt intake. This helps explain why two people can eat the same salty meal and have very different health outcomes. It's not just the salt, it's the body it goes into. But if salt isn't universally harmful, why has the myth of its universality survived so strongly? Partly because simple messages are easier to spread. Public health campaigns thrive on clarity. Telling people cut back on salt and you'll reduce your risk is a straightforward call to action. Explaining salt sensitivity, genetic differences, and dietary balance is harder. Fear is also a powerful motivator. Just as detox products thrive on the fear of toxins, salt warnings thrive on the fear of strokes and heart attacks. By turning salt into a universal enemy, authorities ensure more people take action, even if not everyone needs the same level of restriction. The problem is that oversimplification can backfire. People who believe salt is always dangerous may go to extremes, cutting it so drastically that they put themselves at risk of deficiency. Others, overwhelmed by conflicting information, may ignore the warnings altogether. Meanwhile, the food industry continues to profit from both sides, selling salty processed foods on one hand and low-sodium alternatives on the other. The result is confusion for consumers, who are left unsure of what to believe. So, where does this leave us? The truth is that salt can raise blood pressure, but not in everyone. It depends on your genetics, your age, your diet, and your lifestyle. For those who are salt sensitive, reducing sodium is essential. For those who are salt resistant, it may not be as critical. But for nearly everyone, the real issue isn't the salt you sprinkle on your home-cooked meal. It's the hidden sodium in processed and restaurant foods. That's where intake quietly climbs to harmful levels. The best approach isn't fear or elimination, it's balance. Cooking more meals at home with whole ingredients gives you control over how much salt you use. Pairing sodium with potassium-rich foods helps counteract its effects. Paying attention to overall lifestyle, staying active, managing stress, maintaining a healthy weight, and sleeping well provides even stronger protection than salt reduction alone. In this way, salt becomes one piece of the puzzle, not the entire picture. So, myth or fact, does salt increase blood pressure in everyone? The verdict is clear. It's a myth. Salt raises blood pressure in many people, but not all. The danger is real for those who are sensitive, but the universal fear doesn't hold up. What truly matters is knowing your own risk factors, being mindful of where salt hides in your diet, and focusing on the broader lifestyle habits that support long-term health. Salt is not the enemy. It's a nutrient that must be respected, balanced, and understood. And that's the truth. Busted, not trusted.